Well, good evening or morning, whatever it happens to be at the time that you're celebrating it. But today I'm going to tell you a story about a hero named Jack. Now, you might think, well, Jack, that's not a very powerful hero name. It's not like Superman or Batman. But Jack was a name that a long time ago the writers and the authors quite often would turn to so that they could have maybe something that would remind them of what their hero's name was. So I want to tell you about a story about Jack, who, according to Pap Grisham, Pap was the man I told you about, my great-grandfather that brought all these stories from the mountains of Kentucky. Pap loved to tell about the Jack tales. In fact, if you go to the library, you're going to be able to ask the librarian to help you find some of the books that have got the Appalachian Jack tales or just the common Jack tales, and you already know a little bit about them already. For instance, Jack and the Beanstalk. We tell that to our young people quite often while they're still in kindergarten, and because we love the way we can build up the characters and get good descriptive adjectives that tell what the character is like, and good descriptive and dramatic adverbs that tell what the heroes can do. Well, you look, the season we're about to start. I wore my special colors for this fall of the year. We're beginning the story right before Halloween. So what do we use as a real common symbol for Halloween? The what? Jack-o'-lantern. And you might see a poem that was called Jack the Giant Killer, or you might turn television on and find something that is told about, or Jack be nimble, Jack be quick. Jack seems to be a good common name that we can use to tell these stories over and over again. And Pap was like that. He had to think because, remember, he's very old. In fact, Pap lived till he was 96 years old, and I was the oldest grandchild still at home, and I was 14 when Pap died. Oh, I'll never forget when it happened. One of my cousins, Billie Tom, said, "What are we going to do without Pap?" Because to tell you the truth about it, Pap was kind of the way he was our entertainment center, because he loved to tell the stories that he had heard from his grandmother. So these old stories might be 100 or even more than that years old, maybe even as many as 300 or 400 or 500. But when you hear these old stories, they were stories that were told and retold over and over again. Boys and girls, have you ever thought about how dramatic it was to not be able to read or write and not be able to carry information from this side of the house to the other side? This was so important, the fact that people had to find a way to communicate, and stories were as good a way as you can possibly do to tell a story. Well, it could be a funny story, or it could be a scary story, or it could be an exciting, full of action and drama, or it could be just plain facts that you need to know, because everybody needs to know about what Declaration of Independence is and all those things that we talk about. So it's very important to be able to write or to communicate orally your special story. Numbers have a lot to do with how authors make up stories. 3 seems to be a very, very important number to most authors and writers. Well, think about if I told you the story about how many little pigs, you're going to automatically think 3. Or how many bears in that story? Well, authors get kind of fascinated with having things that have 3 parts to it, and they have connecting words that carry. And then something like, you might say, now and then. These are connecting words. It's kind of like a hinge on the door, that if you turn that doorknob, it'll hold on. You can walk into another room. You can walk into another paragraph in a story by having a good hinge word in there. We use a fancy term calling those conjunctions in the parts of speech. But let me tell you this. This is so important. You need to find out your family's story. Go to people in your family that are older and say, Mom, where did you go to school? What kind of games did you play? What kind of books did you read? Who were your friends? What was going on? You have a great story to tell. And if you don't tell it, it won't get told, because you are the one that is important in your story, your family story. And today I'm going to tell you a story that's based on, well, this story has 7 different parts to it. Instead of 3, like the 3 little pigs or the 3 bears, this has 7. I want you to listen and how I can lead you from one occurrence into another by giving you good connective words. Listen for something called prediction. You know what prediction is? You're right. Just a plain old everyday guess is a prediction about what. This story is so important because it's an old story, but as it's told, you can begin to be involved in it because you think, what in the world is going to happen next? And then you're going to ask, is that Jack just a plain foolish boy? Surely he's got more sense than that. Because I hate to tell you this, boys and girls, but poor Jack, he was sort of, well, we would be kind to say Jack was slow. He just wasn't quite as bright as most of the kids he grew up with. In fact, he really, really worried about whether he was always kind of uncomfortable around other folks and kind of bashful. And I hate to tell you that, but the other kids teased him. In fact, every once in a while, they purely made him uncomfortable by saying, oh, Jack ain't got no sense. Jack had plenty of sense. They just weren't exactly like their sense. And he tried his very best to not be a problem. Well, now Jack's mama, whom he lived with, knew that Jack had a problem. Oh, she worked hard at explaining to Jack. They lived on a farm not too far out of the settlement, and time was going by, and she thought, oh, one of these days, Jack will have to leave home, and I won't be out there to help him get by. What are we going to do? So she said, now, Jack, listen. Now, listen, son, and follow my instructions. Always listen to what Mama's trying to tell you, because I'm going to tell you things that'll help you get by in this world. So folks won't laugh at you and make fun of you and maybe kind of hurt your feelings every once in a while. And he said, yes'm. You know, Mama, I always do exactly what you tell me, because I know you're smarter than I am. And I thank you, and I'm beholden to you, Mama, for you taking so much time to teach me. She said, Jack, as long as you'll listen and follow the instructions, and you got to be honest now and truthful. You always try to take care of yourself, but remember, always do exactly what Mama tells you. And I will. And things went on up at their house pretty well until might be a kind of a hinge word that will lead you into another part of the story. Till one day when Jack was about 16 years old, he was working out in the field, and he was clearing up new ground. Now that's hard work, and he was sweating and wiping the sweat, and he says, you know what? If I had some money, I wouldn't have to work this hard. And then he stopped, and he said, but I ain't never in my whole life even seen no money. Ain't no possibility of me ever getting no money, he said. And he began to worry. How could a boy get to be 16 years old and never even see hard cash money? And he went to Mama and he said, Mama, you know what? What, Jack? She said. Mama, I don't know what money looks like. It's time, Mama, for me to go out into the world and earn my fortune and at least earn a little bit of money so I know what it looks like. Oh, Jack, said Mama, I've been dreading this for years and years. And said, son, we got everything we need here. We raise what we eat and we work the farm. We don't really need money. Yeah, but Mama, a feller ought not to get to be plumb 16 years old and not even know what money looks like. Oh, dear me, said Mama, I guess you're right. She says, but Jack, what are you going to do? He says, I'm aiming to go down to the settlement tomorrow, and I'm going to go to the store there, and I'm going to ask that man that runs the store if he's got a job that I can do to earn me some hard cash money. Oh, Jack, you know, you might not have the skills he'd be wanting to hire for you to do there at the work. He said, but Mama, you always tell me, don't give up. Try and do the best you can. Tomorrow, I'm aiming to go down to the settlement and get me a job. Well, that night, Mama put a fresh pair of starched ironed overalls down and a nice fresh outing shirt. And she said, now, Jack, you take a good bath in the morning. You don't go ask for a job summers without cleaning up and putting your best foot forward. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am, I can. And so early the next morning, Jack got up, put on them overalls all starched and ironed, buttoned up that shirt, bid his mother farewell, and started walking down to the settlement, which just was about as far as from here in Jasper out to over the river bridge or something like you going to Birmingham. About 5 miles, I guess. And he was walking down that hillside and he thought, now how does a feller ask for a job? And he said, he gets all spiffed up and shined and all. Well, he met 3 of his friends coming up the hillside. Hey, Jack. Now, Jack was by nature a friendly boy. Jack, where are you going? Said the boys. Fellers, I'm aiming to go down to the settlement and get me a job. It's time for me to go out into the world and earn my fortune. Well, the boys began to kind of giggle because it weren't much likely Jack's going to be able to earn a fortune. They said, well, Jack, why don't you just come and go with us? Where you fellers are going? Oh, we're going up to the king's castle. What's up at the king's castle? Ain't you heard tell about what's going on? Well, the king's oldest daughter, you know, that real pretty one? Well, that girl about 6 weeks ago started crying. And Jack, she ain't done nothing but squall, bawl, sob, and cry for 6 whole weeks. And it's her pa, the king's plumb worried to death. He's done issued a proclamation. Any young man that can come up here and make my daughter stop a-crying and go to laughing again, I'll give him a wagon load full of gold. We're aiming to go up there and make that girl stop a-crying and go to laughing. Jack says, come on, go with us, Jack. And he said, well, fellers, I told my mama I was going down to the settlement, and that's what I'm aiming to do. I always do exactly what I tell my mama I'll do. But y'all go ahead and good luck to you. I hope you have a successful time. and they bid each other adieu, and the boys went on up toward the king's castle, and Jack went on down to the settlement, walked in the front door, and there was a lady back at the back buying something, and the man was very politely trying. Now, Jack knowed enough that he didn't interrupt when they were taking care of business. He stood up there straight and tall, and he took his hat off just as polite. And the man finished waiting on the lady, and she left. And he looked up and he said, "Well, Jack, how are you and your ma getting along? You ain't been to the settlement in a long time. How are you doing?" "Very well, sir, thank you kindly." "Well, Jack, what are you doing down here today?" He said, "Sir, I am nigh on to 16 years old, and I just had a birthday. And, sir, I ain't never seen no real, sure enough, hard cash money. What I come is seeing if you had a job that I could do where I could earn money, so's I'd at least know what it looks like." "Well, Jack, it just so happens this is the time of the year that I'm kind of pushed. I've got a lot to do and ain't got but just me." He says, "What could you do to help me make a little more money and do the job that I do?" Well, remember, Jack kind of looked around. He was sort of scared anyway. And he says, "Well, sir, I ain't too sure what I could do here in this store. I know how to run a farm. I know how to plow and things like that, but I ain't too sure." He said, "I'll tell you what, Jack, sit right here at this table." And he handed Jack a pencil and a piece of paper. He said, "Jack, take this here pencil and piece of paper and look around and just jot down and write down what you could do if you worked here for a day." Jack hung his head. He said, "Sir, I got to be honest with you because Mama taught me you're always honest and truthful with the people you work with." He says, "I don't read and write too well." "Jack, oh, I know them ABCs, but when it comes to putting them all together, it kind of confused me." "Oh, Jack, if you can't read and write, or you can't," he said, "Jack, can you add and subtract and multiply and divide?" "Yes, sir. If it ain't more than 10, I can count on my fingers." And he said, "Oh, Jack, that won't do when you work in a store. You got to be able to total things and subtract things and multiply things." And he said, "Oh, Jack, if you can't do that, if you can't read and write, you can't work in the store. You best go back home and work with your mama. Y'all have got a pretty successful little farm up there." "Yes, sir, but I ain't never seen no hard cash money." He says, "Well, I'm sorry as I can be, but go home." Well, Jack started back up the road home, kicking an old beat-up can, saying, "Well, a feller can't even earn money, and I still don't know what money looks like." And he went walking down a mumbling and a grumbling and a growling. He weren't in a good mood, I have to tell you. But he got about a mile out of town, and he sat down at the side of the road. And he was sitting there, and he was looking across the road, and over there was this beautiful, beautiful farmhouse and a big old barn. And there in front, right by the gate, this man was just working like you ain't never seen. And he looked up and saw Jack. Now, in them parts, people, if somebody came down the road or up the road, that didn't happen every day or even every month for that matter. And he looked back and he says, "Young feller, what are you doing here in these parts?" Jack says, "Sir, I'm looking for work. I ain't never in my whole life seen no hard cash money." He says, "Well, what kind of work can you do?" "Well, I can do anything on the farm," he said. He said, "Jack, do you know how to milk a cow?" "Yes, sir, Bob." "Do you know how to muck out a stable?" "Oh, yes, sir." "Do you know how to work in the garden?" "Oh, yes, sir." He says, "I ain't got a lot of hard cash money, but if you agree to work today and you do a good job and you follow instructions and you listen and work hard, you'll earn a little hard cash money for your day's work. Is that all right? Oh, yes, sir. I'm obliged to you, sir, and I'm thanking you most kindly. And so Jack went to work, and let me tell you, Mama knowed what she was doing. She had taught Jack how to work hard and follow instructions, and he worked all day long. Come the end of the day, the farmer reached in his pocket and he pulled out a brand new silver shining dollar. Lord have mercy on you, ain't never seen nothing. And he flipped it up in the air. You should have seen it. And Jack caught it and he says, doggies, that's the prettiest thing you never ever seen. Look, it's got a man's head on one side and on t'other it's got a building. He took it down and bit just like folks did to see if things was real back in those days. He said, oh, sir, it's real. Of course it is. And he said, now, Jack, you are a good worker, and you did your work well, and you followed instructions. He said, now, I can't hire you full time, but I can for about a week. Come back the rest of this week, and we'll figure your payday out that way. Oh, sir, thank you kindly, and I'm beholden to you. So he started home. And he was a-singing and a-skipping along, feeling much better, and he'd take that silver dollar out and flip it up and catch it. Take it out and catch it, which was well and good, because it was plumb beautiful. But young'uns, I almost hate to tell you this. They've come to the creek, and across the creek was a foot log. And Jack went right up on that foot log, just like he always did, and started, well, without thinking, he got right smack dabbed in the middle of that foot log and flipped that coin up again, and it come down and hit him on the end of the finger and tumbled down into the creek and went washing away down the hillside. Oh, poor Jack. I'd cry, he said, but Mama's done taught me ain't no use crying over milk when it's done already spilt. So he went on home, kind of dragging and feeling sad. Now, Mama was watching for him because she'd been plumb worried to death about him. And she ran out to greet him. Jack, did you get a job? Yes, ma'am, I did, he said. And she said, oh, Jack, did you earn some hard cash? Yes, ma'am, Mama, you should have seen it. It was all silver and beautiful, and a beautiful lady's picture on one side and a pretty building. She said, well, let me see, Jack. I ain't seen money in a long spell myself. He said, Mama, as I was coming across the foot log, I flipped that coin up in the air. It come down and hit me on the finger and fell into the water and washed away. Oh, poor Jack. Jack, oh, Jack. But are you going back again? Yes, ma'am, the rest of this week. She said, well, listen to me, Jack. Now listen to me and do exactly what Mama tells you. Tomorrow, when you get your payday, you take your pocket and open it up and you put that money, that payday down in your pocket and not take it out till you get home. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am, I can. So early the next morning, just as you're predicting, Jack got up and cleaned himself up and went down the hillside back to the farm to work. He walked in the farm, and the farmer was waiting. He said, Jack, come on back to the barn. Today we're going to be milking all. And they had cow after cow all day long. Old Jack milked those cows. And just as you're predicting, come the end of the day, there was bucket after bucket after bucket of fresh cow's milk sitting. And the farmer said, now, Jack, I ain't got no more hard cash money. I'm going to pay you the rest of this week on goods that you can take home and use. Is that all right with you? Oh, yes, sir. I know what money looks like now. And we lead things like if that, like, we don't really need a big amount of money. We ain't got no place to spend it. He said, we'll be glad to have goods. And then the farmer says, good. And he reached down and picked up 2 big old buckets of fresh cow's milk. Can your mama use this here fresh milk? Oh, yes, sir. She was complaining that we didn't have enough milk, sir. And I'm beholden to you. Thank you. And he started to walk home when he remembered what Mama said. So he put 1 bucket down and took his pocket back and poured 1 gallon of milk down in that pocket and reached over and took the and poured the other and sloshed home. Just as happy as a little dead pig in the sunshine. Walked up and Mama went running out. Jack, did you get paid? Oh, yes, ma'am. And she says, where is it, Jack? Why, in my pockets, Mama. Just like you told me. She said, oh, Lord of mercy, Jack. She said, let me see. Well, Jack reached in his pocket and pulled out the lining with nothing left in it but just a drop here and a drop there. And he looked, but Mama, I done exactly what you told me. Oh, yes, baby, I know, but now, listen, Jack, listen and think. Let's think this way. She says, tomorrow, when you get your payday, find yourself some sort of container and tote it home in the container. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am. And again, just as you're predicting, back he went. Well, this day, the king's wife, the farmer's wife, was standing up by the dairy. Jack, come over here, because today we're aiming to churn this here milk and make fresh cow's butter. Now, if you've never eaten fresh cow's butter, you don't know what good is. Oh, ma'am, thank you. And Jack went to work, and all day long, he worked with the churn out in front. Now, it takes a spell to make cow's butter. You got to fill this up with fresh milk with a lot of cream in it. Put it over by the fireplace to let it get nice and warm, because little bugs have got to grow in there to make it change in from liquid into a solid. And all day long, ker-chunk, 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 Jack churned all day. And again, as you're predicting, come the evening, the farmer come in. They had a pile of cow butter that they had taken and wrapped up in different containers and put it over there inside. And just as you're predicting, sure enough, the farmer reached over and got a big old amount of butter. And he said, Jack, could your mama use this fresh cow? Oh, yes, sir. I was hoping you would say that. There ain't nothing better, he said, than to have a fresh homemade biscuit and you smear it on with fresh cow's butter. Put a little molasses syrup on. Sir, that's the way you eat. And he said, that's good eating for all mountain boys. So he started home toting the butter. Well, he hadn't gone far when, sure enough, he remembered what Mama said, and he thought, you know, I need a container. Well, Jack was out in the middle of the woods in a path. He wasn't at the barn. He wasn't no place like that. And he began to look for some sort of container. And he couldn't find nothing at all. And all of a sudden it dawned on him. My hat, he said, and he took his hat off and lined it with great green leaves. And he took that big old hunk of butter and put it right smack dab, started down the road toting it like this. Well, young'uns, it was a bright, sunny day and the sun was coming, and he thought, whoo, a feller sure could use a hat on a day like today. I don't think it'll matter none if I put this hat back on my head with the butter inside it. And when he went walking, Mama went running to meet him, and she got close to him. She went, Lord of mercy, Jack, I hope that ain't your brains running down the side of your face. Well, he took the hat off, and of course the butter had melted, all except a little pat about as big as your thumbnail. And he looked and he said, "But Mama, I done exactly what you told me." "I know you did, son, and that's well and good. But do you know what Mama does here at the house when the weather's hot and sweaty and everything gets hot?" And she said, "Do you know what Mama does?" "No, ma'am. What do you do?" "Well, I go down to the spring where the water is deep and cold. And she says, I take me a bucket with a good stout lid on it. I put the butter over in there and put that lid on real tight. Tie a rope around the candle, and I lower it down into that cold, cold water. Then when I need it, I raise it back up and take a knife and smear what butter I need and then put the rest back in. That way you can keep your butter and eat it too," she said. Jack says, "Mama, you're so smart." She says, "Well, I've lived a bit longer than you have, son." She said, "Tomorrow, think about things like that when you start home with your payday." Well, back he went the next day. And again he worked very hard. Jack was a good worker in the farm where he knowed how to do things well. Come the end of the day, the farmer said, "Jack, I'm aiming to pay you with something every boy in these mountains has been wanting." He says, "What is it, sir? What is it?" And he walked over to the corn crib and opened it and reached in a box and picked up the prettiest little dog puppy you ever seen in your life. He said, "Jack, would you like to have this puppy? His mama's got the sweetest voice. She can trail a raccoon. She can tree a possum. She's the best hunting dog in the mountains. Everybody's been begging me, but you're such a good worker. I want you to have." "Oh, thank you kindly, sir." And he took the puppy up and loved it up close, and it licked him in the face. And he said, "I always been wanting me a good hunting dog." And he started walking down the road. Now you remember, the dog is a puppy. And as they was walking along, Jack felt something really warm and wet running down. And he says, "Dog, are you a melting?" And young'uns, he took off as fast as he could run down to the creek where the water was deep and cold. And down on his knees he went up and down, up and down. Oh, Lordy mercy. If we'd have been a mile further from home, ain't no telling what had happened to that poor. As it was, as he walked up in the yard, that dog was a-dripping and glassy-eyed. And Mama says, "Good heavens above, Jack, good heavens above." And she grabbed the puppy and took a warm saucer of sweet milk and put it down and petted it, got it to eat. And she says, "Oh, Jack, Jack, why didn't you just tie a rope around its neck and let it walk home behind you?" And Jack thought for a minute. He said, "I could do that." She said, "Jack, don't worry about it." And he said the next day when he went back to work, the farmer was waiting out in the orchard. In fact, they were picking apples. They picked bushels and bushels of baskets of apples. And at lunchtime, they went into the barn and they squished and they mashed and they made them apples into apple juice and apple cider and poured it up into big old crockery jugs that had a little narrow neck and a finger there to hold it by. And they set it, and the end of the day, the farmer says, "Jack, can your mama use apple cider?" "Oh, yes, sir. On a cold winter's day, we sit by the fire and pour us a cup of apple juice with cinnamon in it." He said, "Man, sir, you don't get any better eating what that is." And the farmer agreed with Jack. And he took 2 big old jugs by little narrow necks, and he said, "Now, Jack, take this home and give it to your mama." And Jack started home with those 2 big old crockery jugs full of apple juice. And he thought about what Mama said. So he reached in his back pocket and took out a rope, tied it around the neck of one of them jugs and put it behind him and did the same. And of course walked on home a-singing and a-whistling as happy as day is long. Well, when he walked up, he said, "Look here, Mama." And when he pulled them old ropes up, of course the crockery jugs had done broke, and there weren't nothing left but frails and strings where they'd been tied around the neck of the jug. And he looked at Mama and said, "But Mama, I done exactly what you told me." Mama said, "Jack, we got to plan. We got to think." She went down to the crib and she opened the door and she took out a big old croaker sack, a burlap croaker sack. Why, that sack was nigh as big as that paneling right over there. And young'uns, he said, he looked at it and he said, she folded it up and put it in a jacket. Jack, put this in your back pocket, and tomorrow, no matter what the gift is, you take it real careful and you put it to the mouth of that sack and tuck it down in. Tie the sack together so it's safe and secure, and throw it over your shoulder and tote it home like that. Jack says, "At last, Mama, I'm going to get home with something I can value." So he took the croaker sack with him the next morning, and again, all day, they worked. Well, come the end of the day, the farmer said, "Jack, you are a good worker. You do well, you listen well, you follow instructions, you do a good job." And he says, "I'm aiming to pay you with something I ain't never taught nobody, played nobody." And Jack says, "What is it?" And the farmer went in the barn and came out leading a donkey about this high. He said, "Jack, can you use this here donkey around the farm?" "Oh, yes, sir. I've been needing something to pull up the timbers and the wood and such like that." "Sir, this gift makes this whole work worthwhile," he said, "this whole week." And so, indeed, he took the donkey by the bridle and started walking home. When he remembered what Mama said, and you're predicting, have you gotten that far? As it was, he reached back in his back pocket and he took that big old sack out and he fixed it like that, and he got right smack dab behind that donkey, and he said, "Now, donkey, when I say G, you take your right foot up and put it in this here sack. When I say haw, you take your left foot up and you put it, and then you shake and pull that sack up and tight and put it on your back and tote it home like that." Well, young'uns, I don't know whether you have ever tried to put something in a sack or not, but that donkey did not want to go in that sack. He reared up and went, "Ee-haw, ee-haw," and Jack said, in the sack, in the sack." And they was the screaming and the hollering, and he heard this something going, and he didn't pay much attention to it because he was so busy trying to get that donkey in the sack. And when he got around in front of that donkey and put that sack over that donkey's head, it like to have had a hissy fit, if you know what I mean. And so, indeed, it went on, and all of a sudden Jack heard something go, and he looked up on the hillside in a big old fancy house, and there was a girl sitting up there on that porch, and she said, "Daddy, come here." "Come here quick. I ain't never seen anything this funny in my life." And out come on the front porch come this man a-running with a big old gold crown on right on the top of his head. And he said, "Daughter, look, that must be the smartest man that's ever come in these here mountains. He knowed exactly what to do to make you stop a-crying and go to laughing." He said, "Let's go down and make his acquaintance." And they went, and he said, "Young man, young man." Well, Jack was still trying to get that donkey in the sack. And he kind of slowed down and he said, yes, sir. He said, how did you know? And Jack says, what, sir? How did you know what to do to make my daughter stop a-crying and go to laughing? And Jack says, well, sir, about that time, young'uns, you're not going to believe this. Around the corner of that castle, there come a wagon, and young'uns, it was loaded down with glistening, gleaming, glittering, a great mountain of golden crowns. And the king reached in and pulled that gold up and let it trickle through his fingers. And he said, Jack, you have got the prize. You've made my daughter stop a-crying. He said, just hang around here. As smart as you are, said, one of these days I'll be dead and gone. And I want somebody like you to marry up with my daughter so we'll have somebody who knows how to rule this land. And Jack says, thank you, sir. He still couldn't believe. But he clumb up on that wagon and tied the donkey to the back end of it and started walking home. Well, Mama was sitting there waiting on him, just as Mama always does, as patient as she could be. She saw him come over, and she thought, what in the world? And she went out to meet him. She said, Jack, what happened? He said, look here, Mama. Look here. What a feller can do when he always does exactly what his mama tells him. And that's the story of how Jack earned one of his very first fortunes. I'll let you decide if Jack was really that smart, or maybe he might have just had a lot of dependence on luck and being able to be a part of things happening by nature. But I'll bet you nobody up in them mountains ever made fun of Jack again. In fact, I'll have several of those stories to tell about Jack, about how he was able to each time kind of look out and become one of the richest men that lived in the mountains of Kentucky. That back when I was a little girl and Pap had walked into this area, because Pap was a great believer in us minding Nanny's sides and doing what we were supposed to do. And we always did what Pap said too. I hope you enjoyed this story. I hope you learned to predict and make assumptions. I hope you, one of the things about getting something very, very clear in that, I like for you to think about drawing pictures with words. Take these words and string them together in such a dramatic way that somebody can think, I know exactly what she or he is trying to say. Once you do that, you become a very powerful story author or a storyteller. I would love to hear and read some of your stories sometime. Maybe we can get together and try that. Thank you so much.